Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a question that echoes through the hallways of every fortress monastery. A question that drifts across the lips of scholars who study the records of the Great Crusade, that lingers in the minds of soldiers who kneel before golden shrines and whisper prayers to a winged figure they have never seen but always known. It is a question as old as the Imperium itself, asked by mortals and demigods alike, debated in dusty libraries and blood-soaked battlefields with equal passion. Just how strong was Sanguinius? Not merely powerful, not merely skilled, not merely another one of the Emperor's 20 sons scattered across the stars like seeds thrown upon the cosmic wind. Sanguinius was something else entirely, something that even his own brothers, those impossible beings forged from the Emperor's own genetic mastery, looked upon with reverence and awe, something that demons feared and gods coveted, something that carried within itself the very best of what humanity could ever hope to become, wrapped in wings of alabaster white and armored in gold that shone like a second sun. Tonight, we are going to take a long and careful look at the great angel. We are going to trace his power from the irradiated wastes of Baal Secundus to the blood-soaked corridors of the vengeful spirit. We are going to examine every feat of strength, every impossible act of violence, and every moment of terrifying beauty that defined the Primarch of the Blood Angels. And when we are finished, you will understand why even the War Master himself, the favored son of the Emperor of mankind, believed that Sanguinius should have been the one to lead them all. Because the truth about the great angel is not simply that he was strong. The truth is that he was something the galaxy had never seen before and would never see again. A being of such impossible grace and terrible power that even 10,000 years after his death, the echo of his final moments still drives his sons to madness and glory in equal measure. So settle in, let the noise of the world fall away, and let me tell you the story of an angel who walked among gods and proved himself the greatest among them. To even begin to answer the question of how strong Sanguinius truly was, we need to establish something important about the scale of power we are dealing with. The Primarchs were not merely enhanced humans or clever genetic experiments gone right. They were something far beyond that. Each one was created by the Emperor of mankind, arguably the most powerful psychic entity in the galaxy, using a combination of science and sorcery so advanced that the distinction between the two is essentially meaningless. They were designed to be generals, to lead armies of space marines across the stars, and to bring every human world back into the fold of the Imperium of man. But they were more than generals. They were forces of nature. Each Primarch could survive injuries that would destroy an armored vehicle. Each one could move at speeds that made them blur in the eyes of even enhanced space marines. Yet each one possessed an intellect so vast and so quick that they could process tactical information in real time that would take entire staffs of strategists hours to analyze. They were demigods in every meaningful sense, and the galaxy had never seen their like before. Among these demigods, Sanguinius stood tallest, not in physical height, though he was immense even by Primarch standards. He stood tallest in the estimation of virtually everyone who encountered him, from the mortal soldiers who fought alongside his legion to the other Primarchs who called him brother. There was something about Sanguinius that inspired a reverence that went beyond respect for power or fear of authority. It was closer to awe, the kind of awe that human beings once reserved for the divine. The story of Sanguinius begins, as all great stories do, in a place of suffering. To understand the strength of the great angel, you first have to understand the hell that forged him. Why, because every ounce of power that Sanguinius carried within his transhuman frame was tempered and tested long before he ever set foot on a proper battlefield. Long before the Emperor found him. Long before the Blood Angels were given their name and their purpose. It begins on Baal Secundus. If you were to take the most hostile, radiation-blasted, life-denying wasteland you could imagine, and then make it worse in every conceivable way, you would begin to approach something resembling the world, where Sanguinius landed as an infant. Baal Secundus was one of 2 moons orbiting the planet Baal, and all 3 bodies in that cursed little system had been devastated by some ancient catastrophe lost to the mists of prehistory. The atmosphere was thick with toxins. The soil was saturated with radiation that twisted flesh and rewrote genetic code with every generation. The very air was a slow-acting poison, and the few humans who survived on its surface did so by wearing chemsuits and scavenging the ruins of civilizations that had died long before living memory. These were not soft people. The tribes of Baal Secundus were hard, desperate, clinging to existence with bloodied fingernails against a world that wanted them dead. They called themselves the people of the pure blood, or simply the blood, and their entire culture revolved around survival. Every day was a fight against the environment. Against the mutant hordes that roamed the irradiated deserts, against starvation and disease, and the slow, creeping death that radiation brings to those without the technology to resist it. This was a world where children learned to fight before they learned to speak, where the weak were consumed by the strong, and where the idea of mercy was a luxury that nobody could afford. It was into this nightmare that the infant Sanguinius fell from the sky. His gestation capsule, one of 20 scattered across the galaxy by the machinations of the Chaos Gods, crashed into the irradiated wastes with an impact that left a crater in the toxic soil. The tribesmen who found it could not have understood what it was or where it had come from. They had never seen technology of this sophistication. The capsule was smooth and seamless, constructed from materials that their crude tools could not scratch, and within it, cushioned against the violence of re-entry by mechanisms they could not comprehend, lay something that would change the course of their world and eventually the course of the entire galaxy. Now, when we talk about the Primarchs as children, we need to remember that these were not ordinary infants by any stretch of the imagination. These were beings crafted by the Emperor of mankind himself, 20 demigods designed to be the generals and leaders of the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. The Chaos Gods had stolen them from the Emperor's laboratory beneath the Himalayas and scattered them across the stars. But they could not destroy them. No force in the universe could destroy a Primarch that easily. Sanguinius landed on Baal Secundus in a gestation capsule that the tribesmen who found it recognized as technology far beyond their understanding. They opened it, and inside they found a child who was, in every visible respect, absolutely perfect. Flawless features, luminous skin, the kind of physical beauty that would later make artists weep and remembrancers fumble for words they could never quite find. But there was something else about this child, something that nearly cost him his life before his story even truly began. Growing from his back, unfurling like the pages of some impossible book, were wings. Great white wings, ye feathered and real and utterly impossible. The tribesmen who discovered him recoiled. On Baal Secundus, mutation was the enemy. Mutation was what separated the pure human tribes from the monstrous hordes that hunted them across the desert. Mutation meant corruption, degeneration, the slow loss of everything that made a person human. And here was a child with wings sprouting from his shoulder blades, as clear a mark of mutation as anyone had ever seen. Yet many of the tribesmen wanted to kill the infant immediately. It was the logical thing to do, the safe thing, the thing that their survival instincts screamed at them to accomplish before whatever this creature was could grow into something dangerous. But something stopped them. Call it compassion, call it instinct, call it fate. In every other respect, the child was the most perfect human specimen they had ever laid eyes on. And something about destroying that perfection felt wrong, in a way that went beyond words or reason. They chose to spare him. And in that single act of mercy, the entire future of the Imperium was shaped. Sanguinius grew with the terrifying speed that all Primarchs shared, but even among those demigod children, his development carried a quality that set him apart. Within 3 weeks of his discovery, he was walking, his tiny legs carrying him across the irradiated ground with a confidence that no normal toddler could possess. His eyes, even then, held an intelligence that unnerved the adults who watched over him. He studied the world around him with a focus that spoke of understanding far beyond his apparent age, cataloging the patterns of the desert winds, the movements of predators in the distance, the subtle shifts in the sky that heralded the radiation storms that could kill an unprotected human in minutes. Within a year, he was taller than any fully grown man in the tribe. His physical development outpaced anything the people of Baal Secundus had ever witnessed, and it was not merely his size that set him apart. His strength was something that defied explanation. Before the Blood Tribe had even formally adopted him into their ranks, the infant Sanguinius had already slain a Balite fire scorpion, one of the most feared predators on the moon. These were creatures that entire hunting parties of armed and armored tribesmen struggled to bring down. The child killed one on his own. And his wings, those impossible, beautiful wings, continued to grow alongside him, becoming mighty pinions capable of lifting his increasingly massive frame into the scorching desert air. Till where other Primarchs were defined by their physical bulk or their psychic might or their tactical genius, Sanguinius was defined by flight. He could soar above the radiation-blasted landscape, survey the territory of rival tribes and mutant hordes, strike from above with devastating speed, and then vanish back into the burning sky before anyone could respond. Flight gave him a dimension of warfare that no other being on Baal Secundus could match, and he used it with an instinct that suggested the ability had been part of his design all along. Whether those wings were intentionally crafted by the Emperor or were the result of Baal's intense radiation acting upon his already superhuman genome has never been definitively answered. The Emperor has never spoken on the matter, and the truth may be known only to the master of mankind himself, sitting silent and eternal upon his golden throne. Or what we do know is that the wings were not merely cosmetic. They were weapons in their own right, strong enough that in later years, a charging Sanguinius could strike enemies with his wings at impact, forces equivalent to the heaviest of war hammers. Feathers that looked as delicate as a swan's were harder and more resilient than the finest ceramite, and they carried him through the air with a speed and agility that would later make him one of the most terrifying close combat fighters the galaxy had ever produced. As Sanguinius matured, he did not merely surpass his adopted tribe, he transformed it. Under his leadership, the blood expanded from a single, struggling group of survivors into a dominant force on Baal Secundus. He united the scattered human tribes beneath his banner, and organized them into a fighting force capable of resisting the mutant hordes that had plagued them for generations, and systematically began to reclaim the moon for humanity. His tactical mind was as sharp as any of his brothers, and he combined it with a charisma so powerful, so all-encompassing, that people who met him for even a few moments found themselves willing to follow him into whatever darkness lay ahead. This was not the charisma of manipulation or fear. Why, this was not the cold authority of Perturabo or the savage magnetism of Angron. This was something warmer, something that came from a genuine compassion for the people around him and a sincere desire to see them thrive. Sanguinius loved his people. He fought for them not because he wanted glory or dominion, but because he could not bear to see them suffer when he had the power to protect them. This quality, this fundamental goodness at the core of his being, he was what would later make him the most beloved of all the Primarchs, not just among his own sons, but across the entire Imperium. By the time the Emperor arrived on Baal, Sanguinius had already accomplished what many would have considered impossible. He had taken a scattered collection of dying tribes on a poison world and forged them into a civilization. He had driven back the mutant hordes and secured vast territories for human habitation. He had been worshipped as a god by his people, not because he demanded it, but because they could not conceive of any other explanation for what he was. And then the Emperor came, disguised among the crowds, watching from the shadows as his lost son addressed his followers. What the master of mankind witnessed was not simply a speech. It was a display of leadership so natural, so compelling, that even the Emperor, a being who had walked the earth for thousands of years and seen civilizations rise and fall like waves upon a shore, was moved by it. Sanguinius spoke with humility and courage in equal measure, acknowledging the suffering of his people while inspiring them to hope for something better. It was the speech of a born ruler, and the Emperor recognized it for what it was. But Sanguinius already knew the Emperor was coming. His psychic foresight, that gift or curse that would haunt him throughout his life, had shown him visions of this meeting long before it occurred. Where other Primarchs had fought the Emperor upon first contact, challenging the stranger who claimed to be their father, Sanguinius fell to his knees the moment the Emperor revealed himself. Tears ran from his eyes and fell into the crimson dust of Baal Secundus, and where they landed, alabaster flowers are said to have bloomed upon the barren and toxic soil. It was a moment of recognition so profound, so intimate, that it would be remembered and retold for 10,000 years. The son had found his father, and the father had found the one son who, perhaps more than any other, carried the truest reflection of his own soul. The emperor raised Sanguinius up and looked upon the people of the blood. He saw that they were fair and noble, possessed of a dignity that their harsh world had not been able to crush. The best of their warriors were selected to undergo the transformation into space marines, so implanted with the gene seed that had been cultivated from Sanguinius's own genetic template. These warriors became the Blood Angels, the 9th Legion of the Emperor's armies, and they joined the Great Crusade alongside the brothers who had been created from that same template back on Terra. The Great Crusade was the largest military campaign in human history. It was the Emperor's grand project to reunite all the scattered colonies of humanity under a single banner, to push back the darkness of alien empires and warp-spawned horrors, and bring every human world into the fold of the Imperium. 20 Primarchs led 20 Space Marine legions across the galaxy, conquering world after world, system after system, in a wave of expansion that reshaped the map of the known universe. Fleets of warships carrying tens of thousands of superhuman warriors swept across the stars like a tidal wave of steel and ceramite. And at the tip of one of the sharpest spears in that great advance were the Blood Angels, led by their golden Primarch. Before Sanguinius took command of the 9th Legion, they had been known as the Revenant Legion, and their reputation was a complicated one. The Blood Angels, who had been raised from Terran stock before being reunited with their Primarch, were already experienced killers, hardened by the early campaigns of the Crusade. But they carried scars, both visible and invisible, from the brutal fighting they had endured without their Gene Father's guidance. When Sanguinius arrived, carried by Stormbird transports bearing the mark of the Luna Wolves, the gathered captains of the 9th watched with the wary eyes of men who had seen too much death to be easily impressed. What happened next became one of the defining moments of the Blood Angels' identity. Rather than demanding their allegiance through displays of power or authority, Sanguinius took a knee before his sons. Yet amid the rain and storms of that distant world, the winged Primarch knelt before the rough killers and scarred blood drinkers and offered them not his dominion, but his devotion. It was an act of humility so unexpected, so fundamentally different from how other Primarchs had assumed command of their legions, that it immediately and permanently won the hearts of every warrior present. From that moment forward, the Blood Angels would have followed Sanguinius into the heart of a star. Sanguinius threw himself into the Great Crusade with a passion that matched any of his brothers, and in many ways surpassed them. His first major battle after being reunited with the Emperor was the pacification of Teghar Pentarus, where his initial kill was a massive beast called a Carnodon. The creature was ferocious and enormous, but Sanguinius brought it down with the kind of effortless violence that characterized all his early engagements. The pelt of the Carnodon was fashioned into a ceremonial war cloak that the Primarch wore with quiet pride, a reminder of his first taste of conquest alongside his father's armies. But it was not merely on the battlefield that Sanguinius distinguished himself during the Great Crusade. He was an artist and a statesman, as much as he was a warrior. He composed poetry and created works of visual art that were said to rival anything produced by the greatest human masters. He negotiated peace with worlds that might otherwise have required conquest by force. using his silver tongue and his radiant presence to convince planetary governors and alien warlords alike that cooperation with the Imperium was preferable to annihilation. He was, in every sense, the complete package, a warrior king of the sort that legends are built around. His friendships with other Primarchs were numerous and genuine. He was closest to Horus, the War Master. He and their bond was said to be the tightest between any two of the Emperor's sons. But Sanguinius was also deeply trusted by Robut Guilliman of the Ultramarines, who privately referred to him as one of the dauntless few, the small number of brothers that Guilliman considered truly reliable. He was respected by Rogal Dorn of the Imperial Fists, admired by Jagatai Khan of the White Scars, and even Conrad Kurz, the tortured Night Haunter. They shared a strange kinship with him, born of their mutual gift of foresight. Even among his brothers, however, Sanguinius stood out. There was a quality about him that set him apart from even the other Primarchs, a luminosity that went beyond his physical beauty or his battlefield prowess. Where Fulgrim of the Emperor's children pursued perfection with a brittle vanity that would eventually lead to his corruption, Sanguinius wore his beauty with complete ease, as naturally as breathing. The Khan of the White Scars, a keen observer of his brother's temperaments, once noted that while both Sanguinius and Fulgrim were resplendent in their appearance, Sanguinius was completely at ease in his aspect, while Fulgrim seemed somehow fragile, as though his beauty was a mask rather than a natural state. It was the difference between a being who was genuinely transcendent and one who merely worked very hard at appearing so. Just this distinction matters because it speaks to something fundamental about what made Sanguinius strong. His power was not performative. It was not something he cultivated or maintained through effort. It was simply what he was, as natural and inevitable as the sunrise. And that effortless quality made him more compelling, more inspiring, and ultimately more dangerous than brothers who had to strain to achieve what Sanguinius accomplished without thought. The Primarch Corax of the Raven Guard once stated that among the Emperor's sons, the three greatest warriors were Angron, Horus, and Sanguinius. And the word-bearer Lorgar went even further, claiming that when Sanguinius fought with nothing to lose, only the likes of Horus and Angron could hope to stand against him. That is a staggering claim when you consider the context. Angron was the Primarch specifically designed for personal combat, a gladiator whose entire existence revolved around killing in close quarters. Horus was the War Master, the first and greatest of the Emperor's sons, a being without peer in the combined arts of warfare. And yet Sanguinius was placed alongside both of them as an equal, and in the opinion of many, as a superior. Now let us talk about the physical reality of what Sanguinius was. Not the legend, not the poetry, not the reverence that colors every account of his deeds. Let us talk about the raw, or mechanical, terrifying reality of what it meant to face the great angel in combat. First, his sheer physical attributes. Like all Primarchs, Sanguinius stood roughly 3 meters tall, towering over even the enhanced space marines who served as his sons. His musculature was designed by the Emperor himself, engineered to operate at a level of performance that makes the word superhuman feel completely inadequate. His reflexes operated at speeds that allowed him to perceive incoming fire from weapons that moved at transonic velocities, reacting and countering before a normal human eye could even register that a shot had been fired. His combat speed has been described in various sources as being at least hypersonic, and possibly far higher when fully engaged. To put that into perspective, consider what it means. A bolt round, the standard ammunition of a Space Marine's bolter, what is essentially a small guided missile fired at extreme velocity. Regular Space Marines can intercept bolt rounds with their bare hands under the right circumstances. Sanguinius was vastly faster than those Space Marines. There are accounts of Blood Angels who were temporarily imbued with even a fraction of their Primarch's power, perceiving lasgun beams and plasma bolts as being almost frozen in place relative to their own movements. If that was a fraction of his power, well, imagine what the full measure of his speed looked like in practice. Then there was his strength. Among the Primarchs, Sanguinius possessed physical might that placed him in the absolute upper tier. He could crush ceramite plate, the hardened armor worn by Space Marines, with his bare hands. His power fist and blade could shatter through armor and bone and fortification with equal ease. But his strength was not merely the brute power of an Angron or a Vulcan. It was refined, controlled, yet directed by a mind as sharp as any strategist the Imperium had ever produced. Sanguinius did not simply overpower his enemies. He dismantled them with a precision that made his violence look almost elegant. His durability was equally remarkable. Like all Primarchs, Sanguinius could absorb punishment that would destroy lesser beings. He survived blows from greater demons, those titanic manifestations of the chaos gods that could corrupt entire star systems with their presence alone. He endured broken bones, shattered armor, wounds that would have killed a Space Marine 10 times over, and continued fighting with a ferocity that only increased as his injuries mounted. Primarchs in general are capable of fighting through shattered ribs, collapsed abdomens, even fractured skulls. Nothing short of a killing blow can truly stop them, and Sanguinius demonstrated this resilience again and again throughout his career. But what truly set Sanguinius apart from his brothers in physical combat was the combination of his ground-based prowess with his ability to fly. Think about what that means in practical terms. Imagine you are a warrior facing a being who is already faster, stronger, tougher, and more skilled than anything you have ever encountered. Now imagine that this being can also take to the air at will, striking from above with the speed and power of a diving raptor, then soaring away before you can even begin to mount a counterattack. Imagine that he can fight you on the ground with the skill of the greatest swordsman who ever lived, and then, in the same heartbeat, take to the sky and engage you from an angle that no ground-based fighter can anticipate or defend against. His wings were not merely tools of transportation. They were weapons in themselves. When Sanguinius charged, his wings could deliver Hammer of Wrath attacks at staggering force, or in the tabletop rules that represent his abilities in the Horus Heresy game, a charging Sanguinius strikes with his wings at strength 10, with armor penetration that ignores even the reinforced ceramite of Terminator plate. That means his feathered wings, those beautiful white pinions that looked like something from a Renaissance painting, hit harder than most dedicated melee weapons in the entire game. They were strong enough to smash through tank armor, one strong enough to crush the skulls of lesser demons. strong enough to fold a fully armored space marine in half. His movement speed in the air was classified as massively hypersonic at minimum, and some estimates place it far beyond that. He could cross a battlefield in seconds, appearing wherever he was needed with a speed that made him seem almost omnipresent during large engagements. Enemy commanders who tried to build their strategies around avoiding Sanguinius learned very quickly that there was nowhere to hide from a being who could fly faster than their eyes could track and strike with the force of an orbital bombardment. The aerial superiority that Sanguinius possessed was not just a tactical advantage. It was a fundamental paradigm shift in how close-quarters combat worked. Every other Primarch, no matter how fast or powerful, was ultimately limited to fighting on a single plane. They could move forward and back, left and right, but they were bound to the ground or to whatever surface they were standing on. Sanguinius operated in 3 dimensions, attacking from above, below, and every angle in between with a fluidity that made him practically impossible to pin down. He could dive from extreme altitude, building speed through free fall before striking with his full weight and momentum behind his blade. Or he could hover just out of reach of a ground-based opponent, raining down attacks while remaining untouchable himself. He could grapple an enemy and carry them into the sky, using gravity as a weapon by dropping them from heights that would pulverize even the most heavily armored targets. This 3-dimensional fighting style was not something that could be easily countered or adapted to. Most of his brothers, even the greatest fighters among them, simply had no frame of reference for dealing with an enemy who could attack from directly overhead. Angron was a master of ground-based close combat, but his fighting style had no answer for an opponent who could simply fly out of reach and then dive back in at supersonic speed. Horus was the most complete warrior among the Primarchs, but even his considerable skills were primarily oriented toward ground-based engagement. Only Sanguinius combined the full package of Primarch-level strength, speed, durability, and combat skill, with the added dimension of true flight, making him arguably the most dangerous individual combatant the galaxy had ever produced. Beyond his physical attributes and his mastery of aerial combat, Sanguinius possessed another dimension of power that further elevated him above many of his brothers. He was gifted, or perhaps cursed, with psychic abilities of considerable potency. Chief among these was his power of foresight. Sanguinius could see glimpses of the future, fragments of events that had not yet come to pass, appearing to him in visions and dreams that ranged from maddeningly vague to devastatingly specific. This was not a power he could control or direct. It came to him unbidden, at moments of its own choosing, showing him things that sometimes helped and sometimes tormented him with knowledge he could not use. He shared this ability with his brother Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, and the two of them formed a strange bond over this mutual gift, though they reacted to their visions in fundamentally different ways. Where Kurze was consumed by his visions of darkness and despair, using them to justify his descent into nihilism and cruelty, Sanguinius bore his foresight with a dignity that only made his eventual fate more tragic. He saw his own death at the hands of Horus long before the siege of Terra began. He knew with absolute certainty that he would die aboard the vengeful spirit. And yet he did not run from that fate. He did not try to avoid it or change it through treachery or cowardice. Instead, he carried that knowledge within himself like a weight of iron, and walked toward his destiny with open eyes, knowing that his sacrifice was necessary for the survival of everything he loved. That is a kind of strength that goes beyond muscle and bone. That is the strength of a soul that cannot be broken, yet even by the knowledge of its own approaching end. But Sanguinius's psychic abilities extended beyond mere precognition. He possessed a degree of psychic sensitivity that allowed him to feel the emotions and experiences of those around him, particularly his own sons. He was aware of the red thirst, that genetic flaw in the blood angel's gene seed that manifested as an overwhelming craving for blood during the heat of battle, and it haunted him throughout his life. He spent years trying to find a cure for the condition, knowing that it was a darkness within his sons that threatened to consume them entirely if left unchecked. His psychic connection to his sons was so profound that the deaths of large numbers of blood angels could actually affect him physically. During the battle on Cygnus Prime, when the bloodthirster Kabanda slaughtered 500 of his sons in a single rampage, yet the psychic backlash of their deaths was so overwhelming that it knocked Sanguinius into complete unconsciousness. This was not a weakness in the traditional sense. Rather, it was a reflection of just how deeply Sanguinius was connected to his legion, how much of his own essence had been poured into every single one of them through the bond of gene seed and shared blood. During the siege of Terra, as his visions grew clearer and his death approached, Sanguinius's psychic powers reached heights that stunned even his closest allies. He gained the ability to see in real time through the eyes of his brother Primarchs. He looked through the eyes of the daemon Primarch Angron himself, seeing the siege from the perspective of the enemy. This kind of psychic awareness is almost unheard of among the Primarchs, with only Magnus the Red possessing demonstrably greater psychic capability. The Emperor himself seemed to recognize something special in Sanguinius's psychic nature. When Horus, still uncorrupted, lay dying on the moon of Davin, he reportedly pointed to Sanguinius as the one who should have been War Master, saying that his brother possessed the Emperor's own soul in his blood. That phrase, "the Emperor's soul in his blood," is remarkable in its implications. It suggests that of all the Primarchs, Sanguinius most closely reflected the Emperor's own nature, not merely in power or intelligence, but in the fundamental quality of his spirit. There is also the matter of Sanguinius's resistance to corruption. Throughout his life, the forces of chaos made repeated attempts to turn him to their cause. On Cygnus Prime, the Keeper of Secrets, Kyres offered him a deal: sacrifice himself to the warp entity known as the Ragefire, and the red thirst would be lifted from his legion forever. It was a temptation of extraordinary cruelty, designed to exploit the one vulnerability that Sanguinius could not armor himself against: his love for his sons and his desperate desire to save them from their genetic curse. Sanguinius was tempted. The sources are clear on this point. He very nearly accepted the offer, so great was his despair over the fate of his children. But in the end, he refused. And it was not just willpower that saved him. His apothecary, Meros, threw himself into the rage fire in Sanguinius's place, sacrificing his own humanity so that his Primarch could continue the fight. This moment, as wrenching as it was, demonstrated something important about Sanguinius's strength. His power was not purely individual. It was amplified and sustained by the love and loyalty of those who surrounded him, a love that he earned not through dominion, but through genuine compassion. Even the Chaos gods themselves recognized Sanguinius as something extraordinary. During the plotting of the heresy, Horus deviated from the plan laid out by the Dark Powers and insisted that Sanguinius had to die rather than be converted. When pressed on this, the demon Kyrus asked whether Horus was afraid of having a rival, suggesting that Sanguinius, if he ever fell to chaos, might find even greater favor with the dark gods than Horus himself. Think about what that means. The forces of chaos, those entities that fed on the worst impulses of mortal souls, had believed that Sanguinius's spirit was so potent that if turned, he could potentially surpass even their chosen champion. All 4 Chaos gods wanted Sanguinius as their first choice for the position of arch-traitor. That is not a testament to weakness. That is a testament to a soul of such extraordinary power that even the gods coveted it. No discussion of Sanguinius's strength would be complete without examining the weapons he carried into battle. The Primarchs were not merely warriors. They were walking arsenals, equipped with armaments that were themselves relics of immense power. Sanguinius was no exception, and the tools of his trade were as exceptional as the being who wielded them. His primary weapon was the blade Encarmine, an ornate power sword that served as his signature armament throughout the Great Crusade and the Horus heresy. This was not merely a sharp piece of metal wrapped in a disruptive energy field. Now the blade. Encarmine was a weapon specifically attuned to the bloodline of Sanguinius. Its powers were said to respond only to those who possessed the gene code of its creator, making it useless in the hands of anyone who did not carry the Primarch's genetic legacy. In combat, it granted enhanced striking power and the ability to re-roll failed wound attempts. When Sanguinius found himself outnumbered, the blade responded by granting additional attacks, or as though the weapon itself was aware of its master's situation and adjusted accordingly. After the death of Sanguinius, the blade Encarmine was passed down to the first post-heresy chapter, Master of the Blood Angels, Belarius, who received it from the hands of the Primarch himself before the final battle. Its subsequent history is one of loss and recovery, while eventually falling into the hands of an orc warlord named Garshul the Destroyer, before being recovered at tremendous cost by an exiled Blood Angels captain named Leonatos. The fact that entire campaigns were fought over the recovery of this single weapon speaks to its significance, not merely as a tool of war, but as a living connection to the Primarch who had wielded it. Sanguinius's second major weapon was the Spear of Telesto, a polearm of extraordinary design and devastating capability. The spear's blade was shaped like an elongated teardrop with a hollow at its center, representing the single drop of blood that Sanguinius shed when he swore fealty to the Emperor upon their first meeting, on Baal. The shaft was sculpted to depict the Primarch as a hooded angel of blood, and beneath that sculpture was a purity seal, bearing an oath said to have been handwritten by the Emperor himself. The Spear of Telesto was more than a melee weapon, and it could fire a concentrated blast of energy capable of vaporizing anyone who did not carry the blood of Sanguinius in their veins. Read that again. The spear contained a built-in ranged attack that would literally annihilate any living thing that was not a genetic descendant of its creator. In close combat, the spear granted a massive bonus to striking power on the charge, hitting with force equivalent to strength 10 in the tabletop game, enough to threaten anything short of a titan. So it also carried the ability to cause instant death to its targets, bypassing the normal resilience that allowed powerful beings to survive wounds that should have killed them. Perhaps most remarkably, Sanguinius could throw the spear of Telesto as a ranged attack during battle. This was a one-use gambit, as throwing a pole arm means you no longer have it, but it gave Sanguinius the ability to deliver a single devastating ranged strike at a critical moment before switching to his backup weapons. And that backup weapon was no afterthought. The Moon's Silver Blade was a secondary sword that Sanguinius carried specifically for engagements against demonic enemies. This blade had been granted to him by Rogol Dorn of the Imperial Fists, and was forged from the same alloy used in the construction of the Phalanx, the Imperial Fists' legendary mobile fortress monastery. The Moon's Silver Blade possessed a unique property that made it devastating against beings of the warp. Yea, any wound inflicted against a demon or a psyker by this blade was counted as double, meaning that a single successful strike effectively inflicted twice the damage it would normally cause. Against the denizens of the Imperium, this weapon was a death sentence. The combination of these three weapons gave Sanguinius a loadout that was effective against virtually any enemy he might face. The blade in Carmine was his general-purpose weapon, reliable and devastating against any mortal foe. Yes, the Spear of Telesto was his heavy-hitting option for dealing with the toughest targets, from rival Primarchs to war machines. And the Moon's Silver Blade was his specialized anti-demon tool, turning him into one of the most effective demon slayers the Imperium had ever fielded. Beyond his melee armaments, Sanguinius also carried a sidearm called Infernus, a pistol of considerable power. Infernus was a Melta-type weapon that fired 2 shots at strength 8 with armor penetration values capable of threatening even the heaviest vehicles. It was a one-shot weapon, meaning it could only be fired once per battle, but those 2 shots were enough to potentially destroy a heavily armored vehicle or cripple a major target before Sanguinius closed to melee range. His armor, known as the Regalia Resplendent, provided the protection expected of a Primarch's personal war gear. A base armor save of 2+ on a 6-sided die, meaning that only the most powerful weapons in existence could even hope to penetrate it. Additionally, the Regalia granted a 4+ invulnerable save, a secondary layer of protection that operated on a metaphysical level and could deflect attacks that would bypass normal physical armor. When Sanguinius charged into combat, his invulnerable save became even more effective, as failed saves could be re-rolled, as making him extraordinarily difficult to wound during the initial impact of an assault. Taken together, Sanguinius's equipment was a masterwork of Imperial engineering, each piece designed to complement his natural abilities and compensate for whatever few limitations he possessed. He was armored to withstand the most devastating attacks, armed to deal with any enemy from mortal soldier to demon prince, and mobile enough to dictate the terms of every engagement he entered. Now, let us turn to the battles themselves. Let us look at the moments where Sanguinius's strength was tested against the most terrible foes the galaxy could produce, and let us see how the great angel measured up. The first great test came at Cygnus Prime, and it was a trial that nearly destroyed both Sanguinius and his entire legion. Cygnus Prime was a trap. It had been engineered by Horus, who by this point had already turned traitor, but was still concealing his treachery from most of his brothers. Sanguinius and the Blood Angels were dispatched to the Cygnus cluster under the pretense of dealing with an alien threat, but what awaited them was something far worse. The entire system had been corrupted by the forces of chaos, and at the center of the corruption waited one of the most powerful servants of the blood god Khorne, a bloodthirster named Ka'Bandha. Ka'Bandha was no ordinary demon. Within the hierarchy of Khorne's forces, and he was recognized as one of the most powerful and most feared greater demons to ever manifest in the mortal realm. He was a towering engine of destruction, armed with a massive axe and a whip that could crush ceramite armor in its coils. His strength was immense, his speed terrifying, and his cunning far greater than the mindless bloodlust that most people associate with the servants of the blood god. When the Blood Angels made planetfall on Cygnus Prime, they found themselves surrounded by demonic legions. The fighting was savage and unrelenting, with the sons of Sanguinius battling through hordes of bloodletters, demonic hounds, and corrupted human cultists to reach the heart of the enemy's power. And there, at the center of the storm, Ka'Bandha was waiting. The bloodthirster confronted Sanguinius directly, taunting him with knowledge of Horus's planned treachery. He claimed a kinship with the Primarch, saying that they were brothers of a sort, both beings of blood and violence. Enraged by the demon's mockery and terrified by his claims about the War Master, Sanguinius launched himself at Ka'Bandha in a fury that caught even the greater demon off guard. What followed was an aerial battle of extraordinary violence. Sanguinius and Ka'Bandha clashed in the sky above Cygnus Prime, blade meeting axe, wing meeting claw, in a contest of supernatural force that lit the clouds with the sparks of their collisions. Sanguinius seized the initiative early, driving his power sword into Ka'Bandha's chest and ripping open a gaping wound that would have killed any mortal creature 1,000 times over. The bloodthirster roared in pain and fury, but he was far from finished. Ka'Bandha's counterattack was devastating. His whip lashed out and caught Sanguinius's legs in its coils, crushing them with pressure that no natural material could have withstood. The demon then smashed the Primarch to the ground with the flat of his massive axe, leaving Sanguinius stunned and helpless on the broken stones of the battlefield. It was at this moment that Ka'Bandha showed his true cruelty. Rather than killing the fallen angel, the bloodthirster turned away and began to slaughter the Blood Angels who had accompanied their Primarch into battle. 500 sons of Sanguinius fell to Ka'Bandha's axe in a rampage of butchery that served a purpose beyond mere killing. The psychic backlash of so many Blood Angels dying in such close proximity to their Primarch struck Sanguinius like a physical blow, knocking him into unconsciousness and activating something dark and terrible within the Blood Angel's gene seed. The red thirst erupted across the entire legion. At Marines who had been disciplined warriors moments before, were transformed into berserking, killing machines, driven by an uncontrollable hunger for blood that consumed every rational thought. They tore into the demonic horde with a savagery that matched the demon's own, destroying everything in their path without discrimination. Some turned on allies, slaughtering space wolves who had been attached to the Blood Angels' expedition. It was a catastrophe of the first order, and it planted the seeds of the genetic curse that would haunt the Blood Angels for the next 10,000 years. But Sanguinius was not finished. After being recovered by his sons and revived by the efforts of former librarians led by Makani Kano, who used psychic techniques forbidden by the Council of Nicaea, Sanguinius rose from his injuries and confronted Kabanda a second time. And this time, the result was very different. Where the first encounter had been a struggle between equals, the second was a systematic dismantling. Sanguinius, now fully aware of what he was facing and driven by a cold fury that transcended the hot rage of their initial clash, proceeded to take Kabanda apart. He ripped off one of the bloodthirster's wings, threw him from a platform, and banished him back through a portal into the realm of chaos. The same demon that had broken his legs and nearly killed him just hours before was now being handled with contemptuous ease. And Sanguinius was not done. After banishing Kabanda, he turned his attention to Kiris the Perverse, the keeper of secrets, who had been the true architect of the Cygnus trap. Sanguinius beheaded the greater demon, ending its hold on the system and cleansing Cygnus Prime of its corruption. Two greater daemons, two of the most powerful servants of the Chaos Gods, entities that could threaten entire worlds on their own, dealt with by a single Primarch in the span of a single campaign. And remember, Sanguinius accomplished this after having his legs broken, after being knocked unconscious by a psychic backlash that would have killed lesser beings, after watching 500 of his sons slaughtered before his eyes. He did not defeat these demons while fresh and rested and at the peak of his power. He defeated them while injured, traumatized, and fighting through pain that would have incapacitated anyone else in the galaxy. And this is a pattern that would repeat itself throughout Sanguinius's life, and it is essential to understanding the true nature of his strength. Sanguinius was never at his most impressive when conditions were favorable. He was at his most impressive when everything was falling apart. When the situation was hopeless, when lesser beings would have given up, when the odds were stacked so heavily against him that victory seemed physically impossible, that was when the great angel burned brightest. It was as though adversity itself was fuel for his fire, as though the closer he came to destruction, the more terrifying he became. That is the kind of strength we are talking about when we talk about Sanguinius. But Cygnus Prime, as brutal as it was merely a prelude to the true test of the great angel's power. The siege of Terra was the crucible in which Sanguinius's strength was measured against the absolute worst that the galaxy could throw at him. And what he accomplished during those final desperate days has become the stuff of eternal legend. After escaping Cygnus Prime and navigating the ruin storm, the vast warp storm that had been deliberately created to cut off loyalist forces from Terra, Sanguinius eventually found his way to Macragge. The journey itself was a testament to his resilience. The Blood Angels had been savaged on Cygnus Prime. Their Primarch's legs had been broken, yet the Red Thirst had erupted across the entire Legion for the first time, and the psychological scars of what had happened were still fresh and bleeding. Many legions would have been combat ineffective after such a catastrophe. Sanguinius refused to allow that to happen. He held his sons together through sheer force of will and the depth of his love for them, leading them through the warp-choked corridors of space toward whatever fate awaited them on the other side. At Macragge, Robute Guilliman, fearing that Terra had already fallen and the Emperor was dead, had established a contingency empire called Imperium Secundus, and Guilliman, the consummate statesman and logistician, chose Sanguinius to lead it. Not himself, despite being arguably the most capable administrator among the Primarchs. Not Lion L. Johnson, despite the Dark Angel's Primarch being present and being one of the finest military commanders in the Imperium. He chose Sanguinius, because even Guilliman recognized that the great angel possessed a quality of leadership that transcended mere competence. Sanguinius was crowned Emperor Regent of Imperium Secundus, a title he bore reluctantly, but with the grace that characterized everything he did. It was during this period that one of the most chilling encounters of the heresy took place. Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, Primarch of the Night Lords and one of the most dangerous beings alive, had been captured and brought to Macragge. While Guilliman and the Lion were away, Kurz escaped his confinement and infiltrated Sanguinius's throne room, badly wounding his bodyguard Ascalon in the process. The confrontation that followed was not a physical battle, but a psychological one, and it revealed depths of Sanguinius's character that are essential to understanding his strength. Kurzi shared Sanguinius's gift of foresight. Both brothers could see fragments of the future, and both had been tormented by what they saw. But where Kurzi had been destroyed by his visions, driven to madness and nihilism, by an endless parade of darkness and suffering, Sanguinius had somehow maintained his sanity and his purpose. Kurzi wanted to know why. He wanted to understand how Sanguinius could see the same awful truths that he saw, the same visions of death and betrayal, and the ultimate futility of the Emperor's dream, and still choose to fight. Yet Kurze confided that he had foreseen Sanguinius's death on the vengeful spirit. He asked why the angel still followed the Emperor, when their mutual visions had proven his father's teachings to be lies. He goaded Sanguinius, trying to provoke him into an act of violence that would prove that they were, at their core, the same. Two monsters hiding behind different masks. Sanguinius nearly struck him down. He raised his blade, his eyes burning with a fury that would have terrified anyone who was not already a Primarch. But at the last moment, he halted his sword. He urged Kurzi to change, to choose a different path, to join with his loyalist brothers before it was too late. It was an act of mercy extended to a being who deserved none, and it spoke to the fundamental core of what made Sanguinius different from every other Primarch. Even in his darkest moment, but even when confronted with the inevitability of his own death, he chose compassion over violence. He chose hope over despair. Kurzi set off an explosive trap and escaped, but the encounter had revealed something crucial. Sanguinius's strength was not just physical, it was moral. It was the strength of a being who could stare into the abyss of his own mortality and choose to keep fighting, not because he believed he could win, but because the act of fighting was itself an expression of the values he held dear. That is a kind of strength that cannot be measured in pounds of force or speed of movement. That is the strength of a soul. The position of Emperor Regent did not suit him. Sanguinius was a warrior and a leader of warriors, not a bureaucrat. The day-to-day governance of a galactic empire was handled mostly by Guilliman and the Lion, while Sanguinius agonized over his visions of death and the growing darkness within his son's blood. But his presence on the throne of Imperium Secundus served a purpose that went beyond administration. He was a symbol. He was proof that the Emperor's vision had not died, that the light of humanity still burned, that there was something worth fighting for even in the darkest hour. When it was finally determined that the Emperor still lived and that Terra had not yet fallen, Sanguinius, Guilliman, and the Lion dissolved Imperium Secundus and set out to reach their father. Sanguinius's journey took him through the heart of the Ruin Storm, a passage filled with demonic encounters and psychic attacks designed to break his will and turn him to chaos. The Ruin Storm was not merely a navigational hazard. It was a living, malevolent force, a manifestation of the Chaos God's will given form as a galaxy-spanning tempest that swallowed stars and vomited demons into the material universe. To traverse it was to walk through the belly of hell itself, and every step of the journey tested the loyalty and sanity of everyone aboard the Loyalist fleet. At Davin, the very world where Horus had fallen to corruption, Sanguinius was tempted yet again. The planet was the cradle of the heresy, the place where the first domino had fallen, where the War Master had been laid upon an altar by the treacherous Erebus and subjected to a ritual that had shown him visions designed to turn him against the Emperor. Now Sanguinius stood in the same temple, in the same spot where Horus had stood, and a powerful demon named Madiel offered him the same poisoned bargain. Accept the power of chaos, and the red thirst would be cured. Accept the patronage of the dark gods, and Sanguinius would live to see his sons freed from their genetic curse. He'd accept damnation, and he could save everyone he loved. The temptation was not some abstract philosophical exercise. It was personal, visceral, agonizing. Sanguinius could feel the power being offered to him, could sense the truth behind the demon's promises. The cure was real. The power was real. All he had to do was reach out and take it, and everything he had feared for his sons would be washed away. He was shown a vision of a future where he accepted. A beautiful, a terrible vision where he sat upon the golden throne as emperor of a healed Imperium, where Lorgar lay dead at his feet, where the traitor Primarchs knelt in chains, where the blood angels stood proud and pure, their genetic curse lifted forever. It was everything he had ever wanted, wrapped in a golden lie. He refused. He refused because accepting would have meant becoming the very thing he had sworn to destroy. Yet he refused because the cost of that power was not measured in his own suffering, but in the suffering of everyone he loved. And he refused because Sanguinius, more than any other Primarch, understood that some victories are worse than any defeat. When Sanguinius finally arrived at Terra, the siege was already well underway. The walls of the Imperial Palace were crumbling under the combined assault of 9 traitor legions and their demonic allies. The defenders were being ground down by attrition, their numbers dwindling with every passing day, while the traitors seemed to possess an inexhaustible supply of reinforcements. The skies above the throne world were choked with the smoke of burning hab blocks and the contrails of drop pods carrying yet more enemies to the surface. Titans clashed in the ruins of what had once been the most magnificent city in the galaxy, and their god engines shaking the earth with every step and filling the air with the scream of void shields and the thunder of building-sized weapons discharging at point-blank range. The orbital platforms that had once defended Terra were debris fields now, scattered across high orbit like the bones of great beasts left to bleach in the void. The ground defenses, Those massive walls and bastions that Rogold Dorn had spent years fortifying were being worn down section by section, was each one defended to the last man before falling to the sheer weight of traitor numbers. The situation was not merely desperate, it was apocalyptic. This was not a battle that could be won through ordinary means. This was the end of the world, and everyone fighting in it knew it. Into this inferno, Sanguinius arrived like a comet of gold and white. The Blood Angels made planetfall with the controlled fury that characterized all of their combat operations. Just their drop pods screaming through the polluted atmosphere to slam into the rubble of the palace complex. The sight of their Primarch, wings spread wide against the burning sky, his golden armor catching the light of 1,000 fires, sent a surge of hope through the defenders that no strategic advantage could have provided. Sanguinius was here. The angel had come, and where the angel walked, yet demons died and walls held, and men found the courage to stand, when every fiber of their being screamed at them to run. And then Sanguinius went to work. The list of what Sanguinius accomplished during the siege of Terra reads like a catalogue of impossibilities. He was placed in command of the defense of Gorgon Bar, a critical defensive position within the palace complex, and held it against a massive Iron Warriors assault. During this battle, he personally brought down a warlord titan of the traitorous Legio Vulpa by assaulting its head directly. Let that sink in for a moment. A warlord titan is one of the largest war machines in the galaxy, a walking fortress that stands over 30 meters tall and mounts weapons capable of leveling entire city blocks with a single shot. Sanguinius attacked one by flying up to its head and destroying it with his bare hands and his blade. The feat was so incredible, so far beyond what any reasonable person would consider possible even for a Primarch, that the 3 Warhound Titans accompanying the warlord fled at the sight. 3 Titans, 3 God Engines, each one a walking weapon of mass destruction, turned and ran because they witnessed what Sanguinius did to their companion. That is not merely strength, that is the power to break the will of machines that have no will to break. But the siege was far from over, and the worst was yet to come. As the traitor forces breached the outer defenses and pushed toward the Eternity Gate, the last entrance to the Sanctum Imperialis and the Emperor's throne room, Sanguinius found himself standing as the final barrier between the enemies of mankind and the heart of the Imperium. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary display of individual combat prowess in the entire history of the Horus Heresy. First came Kabanda. The Bloodthirster had returned, and his banishment at Cygnus Prime having expired, and he was hungrier than ever for the blood of the Blood Angels. Ordered by Khorne to harvest 500 Blood Angels' souls in the presence of their Primarch, Kabanda cut a bloody path through the defenders of the Eternity Gate, slaughtering everything in his way to reach Sanguinius. Their third encounter was decisively one-sided, and this time the advantage belonged entirely to the Angel. Something had changed in Sanguinius since Cygnus Prime. The weeks and months and years of fighting, of leading his legion through the horrors of the Ruin Storm, of bearing the weight of his prophetic visions while simultaneously carrying the hopes of his sons on his shoulders, had forged him into something harder and more focused than he had been before. The Sanguinius who faced Kabanda at the Eternity Gate was not the same being who had lost to him on Cygnus Prime. Well, this was a Primarch who had been tested in every way that a Primarch could be tested, and had emerged from every trial stronger than before. Kabanda struck Sanguinius, casting him to the broken ground before the Eternity Gate. The greater demon stood over the fallen Primarch, preparing to deliver a killing blow that would have ended the Blood Angel's lineage forever. But unlike their first meeting on Cygnus Prime, Sanguinius rose. He called upon the very last reserves of his strength and power, summoning something from deep within his soul that went beyond mere physical might. He leapt upon the bloodthirster, seized the massive demon by its wrist and ankle, and rose high into the air. Then, with a single explosive motion, he brought Kabanda down across his knee and broke the greater demon's back with a crack that echoed across the entire battlefield. He broke a bloodthirster's spine across his knee like a dry branch. This was not a small demon, not a minor spirit of the warp. This was Kabanda, one of the most powerful greater demons Horn had ever produced, a being whose strength eclipsed almost anything in the Warhammer universe. And Sanguinius broke him like he was nothing. Then, holding the broken demon's body like a weapon itself, Sanguinius hurled Kabanda into the midst of the advancing traitor horde, using the bloodthirster's carcass as a projectile to scatter the enemies of the Imperium. And then he slammed the Eternity Gate shut. And he was still not finished. Because immediately after dealing with Kabanda, as the blood of the bloodthirster was still drying on his armor, and the wounds from their battle were still leaking crimson down his golden plate, another enemy arrived. This time, it was not a demon. It was a Primarch. Angron, the demon prince of Khorne, former master of the World Eater's Legion, now transformed into a being of living wrath and impossible violence. It had been sent by Horus specifically to kill Sanguinius at the Eternity Gate. Angron was no longer merely a Primarch. He had ascended, or perhaps descended, to demon princehood, becoming a fusion of his already formidable martial power with the unlimited fury of the Blood God. He was faster than he had ever been as a mortal, strong enough to shatter fortifications with his bare hands, and he could regenerate from wounds that would have killed him 12 times over. He was, in many ways, the perfect killing machine, a being designed from the ground up to destroy anything that stood in his path. Sanguinius, already wounded and exhausted from his fight with Kabanda, already bleeding from the countless engagements he had fought during the siege, met Angron in combat without hesitation. There was no time to rest, no time to bind his wounds or catch his breath or gather his strength for this new challenge. The demon Primarch was upon him almost instantly, a mountain of red flesh and black iron descending from the sky, with an impact that shattered the flagstones beneath his hooves and sent shock waves rippling through the defenders clustered around the Eternity Gate. The battle was desperate and brutal beyond anything that words can properly convey. 2 of the Emperor's sons, one still clinging to his humanity and the other having abandoned it entirely, clashed in a storm of blade and claw and fury that made the ground tremble, and the air itself seemed to shrink away from their violence. Angron was faster than he had ever been in life, his demon-enhanced reflexes operating at speeds that made even veteran space marines unable to track his movements. He could regenerate from wounds that would have killed him 100 times over, his warp-infused flesh knitting itself back together, even as Sanguinius cut it apart. Every wound that Sanguinius inflicted closed within seconds. Every limb he severed regrew. Every injury that should have slowed the monster down was simply absorbed and healed, as though Angron's body was an endless reservoir of violent energy that could not be depleted. And yet Sanguinius held him. Not just held him, but matched him blow for blow, parrying strikes that could split a battle tank in half, dodging attacks that moved faster than sound, and striking back with the precision and fury of a being who had been fighting the enemies of mankind for longer than most civilizations had existed. The two Primarchs carved a circle of devastation around themselves, their combat so intense that lesser beings who strayed too close were simply destroyed by the sheer kinetic overflow of their engagement. Angron's raw power was staggering, his demon-enhanced strength and speed pushing Sanguinius to his absolute limits. The demon Primarch managed to impale Sanguinius on his black blade during the fighting, driving the weapon through the angel's body in what should have been a fatal wound. The blade punched through golden armor and transhuman flesh, and Sanguinius felt the cold bite of corrupted metal sliding between his ribs. Any other being in the galaxy would have died in that moment. Any other warrior would have felt the darkness close in and let go, allowing death to take them to whatever peace awaited beyond the veil. But Sanguinius, even with a sword through his body, was not done fighting. In a moment of tactical genius born from desperation and the absolute refusal to give in, Sanguinius used the close proximity that being impaled created to reach Angron's head. And there, he did something that no other being in the Imperium had ever managed to accomplish. He reached into Angron's skull and ripped out the butcher's nails. Those cursed implants that had been driven into Angron's brain by the slavers of Nuceria, that had tormented him for his entire existence, that had been fused so deeply into his neural architecture that even the Emperor himself had declared them impossible to remove without killing their host. Sanguinius tore them out with his bare hands, ripping the ancient, a corrupted technology free from a demon Primarch's skull through nothing but raw physical force and a will that refused to accept defeat. The sheer audacity of this act defies any reasonable analysis. This was not a planned maneuver drawn from some tactical manual. This was not a technique that Sanguinius had practiced or prepared for. This was a moment of pure, primal improvisation, yet the kind of split-second decision that can only be made by a being who operates at a level of consciousness so far beyond normal that ordinary concepts of strategy and planning simply do not apply. With a demon's blade through his body, his blood flowing freely, his strength fading with every heartbeat, Sanguinius identified a vulnerability in his enemy's physiology that no one else had ever exploited, and acted on it in the space between one heartbeat and the next. And the effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Without the nails to anchor his demon-enhanced physiology, Angron's head quite literally exploded. The demon Primarch was banished back into the warp, his physical form collapsing as the binding that held it together was severed. The World Eaters who had accompanied their gene father went berserk, their already tenuous grip on sanity shattered completely. They turned on their own allies, cutting down other traitor forces in a frenzy of directionless violence. The traitor advance broke. The Eternity Gate held. Let us take a moment to fully appreciate what Sanguinius accomplished in this sequence of events. In the span of a single engagement, fighting continuously without rest or respite, he defeated Kabanda, one of the most powerful greater demons in existence. He then fought and banished a demon Primarch, a being empowered by a chaos god. Yet he accomplished this while already wounded, already exhausted, already having fought through days of continuous combat during the most brutal siege in human history. And he did it while simultaneously protecting the Eternity Gate, the last line of defense between the forces of chaos and the Emperor of mankind. Some fans refer to this sequence as the boss rush, and the term is entirely appropriate. Sanguinius faced a series of increasingly powerful opponents, one after another, without pause or recovery time, and he defeated all of them. No other Primarch in the Horus heresy accomplished anything comparable. It is arguably the single greatest individual military achievement in the entire history of the Imperium, and it was accomplished by a being who knew with absolute certainty that he would not survive the day. Because after the Eternity Gate was secured, after Kabanda was broken and Angron was banished, Sanguinius was summoned by the Emperor himself. The Master of Mankind had detected that Horus had lowered the void shields of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, and intended to launch a teleportation assault directly aboard the vessel to confront his traitorous son. The Emperor wanted Sanguinius to stay behind, to command the remaining loyalist forces on Terra, while the Emperor dealt with Horus personally. Sanguinius refused. He confronted the Emperor as his father was fitting on his armor for battle, and for the first time, yet he revealed the full truth of his prophetic visions. He told the Emperor that he had seen his own death at Horus's hands, that he had known about it for years, that the knowledge had been a weight he had carried in silence through every battle and every campaign. But he was not seeking death. He was seeking to change his fate by challenging it directly, by facing Horus head-on instead of hiding behind the walls of the palace and waiting for the inevitable. The Emperor, who had spent countless lifetimes attempting to defy fate himself, was moved by his son's courage. He changed his mind and allowed Sanguinius to join the assault. The teleportation to the Vengeful Spirit scattered the Imperial forces throughout the massive warship. Sanguinius was separated from the Emperor and his other companions, lost somewhere in the demon-infested corridors of a vessel that had been corrupted beyond recognition by the energies of the warp. Us alone, and still bearing the wounds of his earlier battles, the great angel fought his way through the twisted bowels of the Vengeful Spirit until he reached the bridge, the throne room of the War Master himself. And there, Horus was waiting. The bridge of the Vengeful Spirit had been transformed beyond recognition. What had once been the command center of the greatest warship in the Imperial fleet was now a throne room of nightmares, its walls covered in sigils that pulsed with malevolent energy, yet its atmosphere thick with the stench of corruption and the whispers of entities that existed just beyond the edge of perception. The lights were wrong, casting shadows that moved independently of the objects that should have created them. The temperature fluctuated wildly between freezing cold and scorching heat. And at the center of it all, seated upon a throne of twisted metal and bound souls, was Horus, or what had once been Horus. The War Master had changed since Sanguinius had last seen him. The corruption of chaos had worked its way into every cell of his body, transforming him into something that transcended even the extraordinary baseline of a Primarch. He was larger, more imposing. His eyes burned with an inner fire that was not his own, and when he spoke, his voice carried the harmonic undertones of 4 distinct entities, the Chaos Gods speaking through their chosen vessel. The combined power of Horn, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh flowed through Horus like blood through veins, making him arguably the single most powerful mortal being in the galaxy at that moment. Some sources suggest he had become the equal of the Emperor himself, which is a claim so extraordinary that it defies comprehension. What followed was not merely a fight between 2 Primarchs. It was the collision of 2 philosophies, 2 visions of the future, 2 brothers who had once been closer than any other pair of the Emperor's sons. Sanguinius tried, even in this final moment, to reach whatever part of his brother might still remain beneath the corruption. He spoke of their old friendship, of the bond they had shared during the Great Crusade, of the dream they had once fought for together. He tried to use their connection as a lever to pry Horus free from the grip of the Chaos Gods. Horus would not listen. The War Master, now fully empowered by all 4 Chaos Gods, he had become something that transcended even the normal bounds of Primarch power. He was, by some accounts, the equal of the Emperor himself, filled with so much warp energy that reality distorted around him like light bending near a star. This was not the Horus that Sanguinius had known and loved. This was something else entirely, a vessel for the combined will of the ruinous powers, wearing the face of a friend. The battle was as brutal as it was brief. Sanguinius fought with everything he had, with every ounce of skill and strength and fury that remained in his battered body. His blade sang through the corrupted air of the vengeful spirit's throne room, each swing carrying the weight of 10,000 years of human hope behind it. He was fighting not just for himself, not just for the Emperor, not just for the Blood Angels, but for every human being who had ever looked up at the stars and believed that the light would win against the darkness. Every strike he landed was a prayer, yet every parry was a promise. Every moment he held Horus at bay was a defiance of fate itself, the angel refusing to go quietly into the death that his visions had foretold for so long. He was fighting a fully empowered, chaos-blessed war master, while he himself was exhausted, wounded, bleeding from a dozen injuries sustained during hours of continuous combat against some of the most powerful enemies in the galaxy. His wings were torn. His armor was cracked. The golden plate that had once shone like a second sun was now dull with grime and blood and the residue of warp energy that clung to everything aboard the vengeful spirit, like a film of spiritual oil. The deck was stacked against him in every conceivable way, and yet he managed to leave a mark. Accounts vary on the exact nature of what Sanguinius accomplished in those final moments. Some sources say he managed to create a small crack in Horus's otherwise impervious power armor, a tiny chink that the Emperor would later exploit to deliver the killing blow. Others suggest that his sacrifice served a more metaphysical purpose, that by dying at Horus's hands, he created a moment of emotional vulnerability in the War Master, a flicker of regret or humanity that the Emperor was able to use as a weapon. Still others believe that Sanguinius's death served as a proof of concept for the Emperor, demonstrating beyond any doubt that Horus was truly lost and that there was nothing left of the brother they had both loved. Whatever the precise mechanism, the consensus across 10,000 years of Imperial history is clear. Sanguinius's sacrifice was the key that unlocked the Emperor's victory. Without the great angel's death aboard the vengeful spirit, Horus would not have been defeated. The Imperium would have fallen, and the galaxy would have been consumed by chaos. When the Emperor finally reached the bridge of the vengeful spirit, he found the winged corpse of his son lying at Horus's feet. The sight of Sanguinius, broken and dead at the hands of a brother he had loved, reportedly filled the Emperor with a rage so total, so incandescent, that it burned away whatever hesitation he might have felt about destroying his favored son. The chink in Horus's armor, whether physical or spiritual, provided the opening the Emperor needed. Horus was destroyed, yet his soul annihilated so completely that not even the Chaos Gods could reclaim it. Sanguinius died as he had lived, in service to something greater than himself. But the story of Sanguinius does not end with his death aboard the vengeful spirit. In many ways, the true measure of his strength is not what he accomplished while he lived, but what his death set in motion for the next 10,000 years. When Sanguinius fell, at his death sent a psychic shockwave across the galaxy that was felt by every single blood angel alive. This was not a metaphorical impact. It was a literal psychic event of staggering proportions, a burst of agony and loss so intense that it imprinted itself permanently on the gene seed of his sons. Every blood angel who had been created from Sanguinius's genetic template carried within them the echo of their Primarch's final moments, a ghost memory of his battle with Horus, his pain, his fury, and his ultimate defeat. This echo became the Black Rage. The Black Rage is one of the most devastating genetic flaws in the entire Adeptus Astartes. Unlike the Red Thirst, which had existed in some form since before Sanguinius's death, the Black Rage was born from the moment of the great angel's murder. It manifests as a sudden and total psychic breakdown, in which the afflicted blood angel loses all connection to the present and is mentally transported back to the last hours of Sanguinius's life. They believe they are Sanguinius himself, fighting on the deck of the vengeful spirit. They see Horus where there is no Horus. They fight with a fury and a desperation that goes beyond anything a normal space marine could produce, because they are experiencing the concentrated final moments of a dying Primarch. There is no cure. Once the Black Rage takes hold, the Blood Angel is lost forever. They are organized into the Death Company, a given black armor daubed with red crosses representing the wounds of Sanguinius, and sent into the most dangerous battles the chapter can find, in the hope that they will die quickly and honorably, rather than degenerating into complete insanity. But here is the remarkable thing. When a blood angel falls to the Black Rage, they are not merely driven mad. They are also, temporarily, imbued with a fraction of Sanguinius's own power. Their strength increases dramatically, yet their resilience becomes almost superhuman even by Space Marine standards. Their combat ability skyrockets as the echoes of the Primarch's own fighting instincts overlay their own skills. In their final hours, the Death Company become shadows of the great angel himself, fighting with a portion of his might even 10,000 years after his death. That is the kind of strength we are talking about. At a being so powerful that the mere memory of his last moments can transform ordinary space marines into berserking demigods. A being whose psychic imprint was so strong that it permanently altered the genetic code of every successor chapter, derived from his gene seed, a being whose death did not diminish his legacy, but amplified it, turning every son of Sanguinius into a potential vessel for the echo of his final, terrible fury. Sanguinius's body was recovered from the vengeful spirit by Rogel Dorn and returned to the Blood Angels, who bore it home to Baal and laid it to rest in the golden sarcophagus, deep within a vast tomb beneath their fortress monastery. That tomb has become one of the holiest sites in the entire Imperium, a place of pilgrimage for blood angels from across the galaxy, who come to pay their respects to the Primarch who gave everything for the survival of humanity. But there are whispers, persistent and tantalizing, that Sanguinius is not entirely gone. An apparent avatar of the Primarch appeared before Mephiston, the Lord of Death and Chief Librarian of the Blood Angels, within the warp itself. This being stated cryptically that it was not Sanguinius, as Sanguinius was dead, and yet both Mephiston and Commander Dante suspected that a psychic echo of the Primarch might still endure somewhere within the Imperium. Whether this echo is truly Sanguinius, or merely a reflection of the psychic imprint he left upon the warp at the moment of his death, remains one of the great mysteries of the Blood Angels chapter. The feather of Sanguinius, recovered from the vengeful spirit after the battle, has been shown to possess remarkable properties, used by the perpetual John Grammaticus to travel across space and time itself. A single feather from his wing, carrying within it some fragment of the great angel's essence, she functioning as a key to the fundamental structure of reality. That is not the relic of an ordinary warrior. That is the artifact of something approaching divinity. Across the Imperium, Sanguinius is venerated almost as highly as the Emperor himself. Temples dedicated to the great angel rise alongside those of the Master of Mankind. A sacred day of celebration called Sanguinala, modeled on ancient Terran traditions of feasting and gift-giving, commemorates his sacrifice every year. Adepts across 1,000,000 worlds wear the red badge of Sanguinius on their breast during this festival, honoring the memory of the Primarch who died so that humanity might live. It is one of the few truly universal celebrations in an Imperium that spans more worlds than any single mind can comprehend, a moment of shared joy and remembrance that transcends the barriers of distance and culture and class that normally divide the citizens of the Emperor's domain. The influence of Sanguinius extends beyond mere remembrance into the active military operations of the Imperium in the 41st millennium. The Blood Angels chapter, led for over 1,000 years by Commander Dante, the oldest living loyalist space marine outside of a dreadnought, continues to fight with a ferocity and nobility that would make their Primarch proud. Dante himself is a living testament to the endurance of Sanguinius's legacy, a warrior who has fought for over a millennium and yet continues to serve, driven by a vision in which Sanguinius appeared to him and showed him that there would come a moment when the Imperium needed him most. That moment, Dante believes, has not yet arrived. And then there is the Sanguinor. This mysterious golden warrior appears on battlefields across the galaxy, manifesting without warning at moments of the Blood Angel's greatest need. She clad in golden armor that mirrors the war gear of Sanguinius himself, the Sanguinor fights with a skill and fury that surpasses anything a normal space marine should be capable of. Some believe the Sanguinor is a physical manifestation of Sanguinius's psychic echo, a fragment of the Primarch's spirit that has taken on independent existence within the warp. Others believe it is the transformation of the apothecary Meros, who sacrificed himself in Sanguinius's place on Cygnus Prime, and was changed into something between mortal and demon. Whatever the truth, the Sanguinor's existence is further evidence that the great angel's power did not end with his physical death. The devastation of Baal, when the tyrannid hive fleet Leviathan descended upon the Blood Angel's homeworld in overwhelming force, provided perhaps the most remarkable post-mortem evidence of Sanguinius's enduring influence. As the Blood Angels and their successor chapters fought a desperate last stand against the alien tide, all seemed lost. The fortress monastery was breached. Chapter masters fell. The moons of Baal were stripped of all life. And then, in one of the most unexpected twists in the entire history of the 41st millennium, Kabanda himself returned. The Bloodthirster, that ancient nemesis of Sanguinius and the Blood Angels, emerged from the warp with a demonic host and proceeded to destroy the tyrannid forces threatening the sons of his most hated enemy. Not out of compassion, not out of loyalty, but because Kabanda could not bear the thought of anyone else destroying the Blood Angels. That honor, he believed, belonged to him alone. It was a dark echo of the relationship between Sanguinius and the Bloodthirster, a twisted reflection of the rivalry that had defined both of their existences. Even in death, at even 10,000 years after their final confrontation, the bond between angel and demon endured, shaping events on a galactic scale. Of all the Primarchs, Sanguinius is commonly held in the highest honor, not because he was the strongest, though he was among the strongest, not because he was the most skilled, though his skill was legendary, not because he won the most battles or conquered the most worlds, though his achievements in both areas were remarkable. Sanguinius is honored above his brothers because he embodied something that the Imperium desperately needed and still desperately needs: hope, compassion, the belief that strength and kindness are not opposites but partners, that a warrior can be gentle and a leader can be humble, that the greatest power in the universe is not the ability to destroy, but the willingness to sacrifice. Horus himself said it best, yet in a moment of honesty that cut through the propaganda and the politics and the endless jockeying for position that defined the relationships between the Primarchs. He has the vision and strength to carry us to victory, the War Master said of his brother, and the wisdom to rule once victory is won. For all his aloof coolness, he alone has the Emperor's soul in his blood. Each of us carries part of our father within us, whether it is his hunger for battle, his psychic talent, or his determination to succeed. Sanguinius holds it all. He holds it all. That is the answer to our question. That is how strong Sanguinius truly was. He held within himself the complete reflection of the Emperor's nature, the full spectrum of abilities and qualities that the Master of Mankind had distributed among his 20 sons. Where other Primarchs received a portion of their father's greatness, one aspect emphasized above all others: Sanguinius received the whole. So he was the warrior and the poet, the killer and the healer, the general and the statesman, the angel and the beast. He carried within himself the red thirst that could have consumed him, and the foresight that showed him his own destruction, and he bore both burdens with a grace that made other demigods look like children playing at war. He was not merely strong in the way that muscles are strong, or weapons are deadly, or armor is thick. He was strong in the way that faith is strong, in the way that love is strong, in the way that a father's determination to protect his children is strong. His power was not merely physical, though his physical might was terrifying. His power was the power of a soul that refused to break, a spirit that could not be corrupted, a heart that continued to beat with compassion, even when every rational part of him knew that compassion would be his death. Sanguinius was the strongest of the emperor's sons because he was the most complete, the most human in his virtues, the most terrible in his wrath, the most beautiful in his sacrifice, and the most enduring in his legacy. 10,000 years after his death, his sons still carry his blood in their veins and his fury in their souls. 10,000 years after his death, his name is still whispered in prayers and shouted in battle cries across 1,000,000 worlds. 10,000 years after his death, and the echo of his final moments still has the power to transform ordinary warriors into something approaching the divine. Consider for a moment the breadth of what we have covered tonight. A being who slew a fire scorpion as a child on one of the most hostile worlds in the galaxy, who united warring tribes on a death world before he was fully grown, who led armies across the stars during the Great Crusade and earned the respect and love of nearly every being he encountered, who defeated not one but two greater demons at Cygnus Prime after having his legs broken and his consciousness shattered, who was chosen to rule Imperium Secundus by two of the most brilliant minds among the Primarchs, who resisted the temptation of chaos again and again and again, despite being offered everything he ever wanted, who brought down a warlord titan with his bare hands, who broke a bloodthirster's spine over his knee, who ripped the butcher's nails from a demon Primarch's skull while impaled on a demon's sword, who fought Horus himself, fully empowered by 4 chaos gods, and still managed to leave a mark on the War Master's armor that allowed the Emperor to win. Each one of those feats, taken individually, would be enough to secure a warrior's legend for eternity. Sanguinius accomplished all of them, and he accomplished them while bearing a curse in his blood, visions of doom in his mind, and the knowledge that every step he took carried him closer to a death he had foreseen but refused to flee from. That is strength. That is the strength of Sanguinius, the great angel, the brightest one, the Lord of Baal, the all-beloved, the Primarch of the Blood Angels, the defender of the Eternity Gate, the slayer of demons, the breaker of bloodthirsters, the one who should have been War Master, the one who carried the Emperor's soul in his blood, the one who chose to die so that humanity might live. And somewhere in the darkness of the warp, in whatever realm awaits those whose spirits burn too bright to be truly extinguished, the echo of the great angel still endures, waiting, watching. And perhaps, if the whispers of Mephiston and Dante are to be believed, still fighting, because angels do not die. Not truly, not completely, not when their blood still flows in the veins of those who carry their name. And the blood of Sanguinius flows still. If this story of the great angel moved you, if you felt the weight of his sacrifice and the fire of his fury, then hit that like button and let me know. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a journey into the deepest lore of the 41st millennium. There are more stories to tell, more heroes and monsters to explore, more darkness to illuminate, and more legends to bring to life. Until next time, stay safe out there. The Emperor protects.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.